Hey, Charlie, we gonna read a book?
Yeah, we're gonna read a book.
All right, we wanna make music together?
I'll do that at the very end.
All right, sounds good. We're gonna do this here book. It's called Mr. Me and the Little Miss. Mr. Stubborn says there are no monsters in this here book.
But there are monsters in this book.
No, it says there are no monsters right there. It says it right there.
When I watched the original show, Mrs. Stubborn thinks that there are no monsters in this book.
Stubborn says there are no monsters in this book.
Yeah, all right.
Music together.
All right, we'll get to the music at the very end.
All right, okay, music at the end. When it comes to things that go bump in the night, Mr. Stubborn shows no fear, but that's because he doesn't believe in monsters. These three stories show you just how stubborn Mr. Stubborn can be, even when he's face to face with a scary creature. He still refuses to admit he's wrong.
I know that.
That's because he's stubborn, Charlie.
All right.
Finding the Fangosaurus.
Oh, I remember this. This is funny.
Mr. Stubborn, Mr. Noisy, and Little Miss Naughty wandered through a dark cavern. They were looking for monsters called the Fangosaurus.
We've been down here for hours and still haven't seen the Fangosaurus. It does not exist,
said Mr. Stubborn.
I know it's real.
Protested Little Miss Naughty.
It's got to be here.
Mr. Noisy looked around. What does the map say? He asked.
Mr. Stubborn unfolded the map.
Mr. Stubborn, you let me read that, Charlie. Mr. Stubborn unfolded the map.
It says, ignore me and listen to Mr. Stubborn. He knows his way around caves.
Mr. Stubborn always thought he was right.
The map does not say that.
Suddenly, Little Miss Naughty screamed.
Look, there it is. What? Where?
What? Where? Mr. Noisy and Mr. Stubborn shouted.
Haha.
Little Miss Naughty laughed.
Made you look. No more jokes, Little Miss Naughty. Let's move on,
said Mr. Stubborn. The map says to turn right at the stalagmite, shouted Mr. Noisy. Mr. Noisy shouted. There it is.
That's not a stalagmite. That's a stalactite,
argued Mr. Stubborn. But Mr. Noisy knew how to tell them apart. Stalactites hang from the ceiling, like that one. And he yelled, pointing up.
No, you're wrong.
Mr. Stubborn insisted.
This is a stalactite on the ground.
Mr. Stubborn didn't really know the difference, but he still sure was right. Sure, he was right.
Actually, that's a stalagmite on the ground, but he thinks it's a stalactite.
That's right, Charlie, that's right.
And that is a Fangosaurus.
And that, shrieked Little Miss Naughty. Ah! Mr. Noisy shouted.
Oops.
Giggled Little Miss Naughty.
Sorry, it's just a stalagmite. I finished looking for your fake monster,
said Mr. Stubborn. Mr. Stubborn set off farther into the cave. Mr. Stubborn, Mr. Noisy hollered after him. I think this is the way back. Our footprints are coming from this direction.
Those aren't footprints. They're foot-shaped holes in the dirt,
argued Mr. Stubborn. Suddenly, Little Miss Naughty heard the noise. She turned around and came face to face with the dreaded Fangosaurus. He picked her up by her hat and tossed her from side to side.
Mr. Stubborn.
Little Miss Naughty cried.
Mr. Noisy. It's.
We're done.
We're done playing with your silly games, Little Miss Naughty.
Mr. Stubborn replied without bothering to look.
I'm telling you, Mr. Noisy, it's this way.
I'm calling for help, Mr. Noisy yelled. He sounded the alarm on his megaphone, which was even louder than Mr. Noisy himself. Startled by Mr. Noisy's siren, the Fangosaurus dropped Little Miss Naughty, and then he ran all straight through the wall of the cave.
There's the exit right there.
cried Mr. Stubborn, spying the monster-shaped hole in the wall.
I knew it was this way. Come on, little Miss Naughty. I told you there was no monster.
Oh, that Mr. Stubborn is stubborn, isn't he, Charlie?
Yep.
Okay, then.
This is like Grover's monster at the end of this book.
What werewolf? It was Friday, the 13th, and Mr. Stubborn and Little Miss Chatterbox were having dinner at the Dillydale restaurant.
Oh my gosh, look at Mr. Stubborn.
Said Little Miss Chatterbox.
A full moon. Do you know what happens when there's a full moon on Friday the 13th? Someone's gonna turn into a werewolf.
Oh my. There's no such thing
There's no such thing as a werewolf.
said Mr. Stubborn.
Oh, but it's true.
Said Little Miss Chatterbox.
I saw it on TV. You cannot believe everything you see on TV.
Mr. Stubborn replied. Suddenly, Mr. Stubborn's ears began to grow bigger, and his nose began to grow longer, and he was turning into a werewolf.
I tell you, little Miss Chatterbox, there's no such thing as a werewolf.
Mr. Stubborn said, unaware of his changes.
But Mr. Stubborn...
Protested Little Miss Chatterbox.
No, I am right.
Said Mr. Stubborn.
But you just turned into a werewolf.
Little Miss Chatterbox yelled. Mr. Stubborn reached up and touched his werewolf face.
My face has not been changed.
He insisted.
But it does look like a werewolf face.
He's looking like a werewolf face, Charlie. Just then, Mr. Tickle walked up to the table.
Hi, little Miss Chatterbox. Hi, Mr. Ah!
Mr. Tickle screamed, and jumping into the air, Mr. Stubborn.
Mr. Stubborn, you're a werewolf. Ah! I've had enough of this ridiculous talk.
Said Mr. Stubborn.
There's no such thing as a werewolf.
But as he walked through the restaurant, everyone screamed in fright. Ah! Bellowed Mr. Noise, and he jumped off his table.
Werewolf.
Little Miss Helpful yelled. Only Little Miss Sunshine remained calm. Mr. Stubborn stopped in front of her table, and she held up a mirror. Mr. Stubborn gazed at his werewolf face, but he refused to admit he was wrong.
This mirror doesn't work.
He shouted.
There's no such thing as a werewolf.
And with that, the werewolf stormed away.
Ah!
How about that, Charlie? That's a pretty good story, ain't it? I don't think Mr. Stubborn is going to ever say he was wrong. What do you think?
I have to think he's wrong.
But he ain't going to say he's wrong, because he's stubborn.
What?
The search for the swamp monster.
Kermit's swamp, I think.
One dark and spooky night, Mr. Stubborn, Mr. Quiet, and Mr. Grumpy walked through Dillydale Swamp, and they were looking for the Dillydale Swamp Monster.
I'm telling you, gentlemen, it's here somewhere.
Said Mr. Grumpy.
This is a waste of time.
Said Mr. Stubborn.
The swamp monster does not exist.
Mr. Grumpy shined his flashlight on his boat.
Look, the monster bit off my motor last night. Oh, that's a big bite.
Whispered Mr. Quiet.
Your boat is just cheap. The motor probably fell off on its own.
Argued Mr. Stubborn.
But I saw it. I'll prove it to you.
Said Mr. Grumpy. But he pointed to the bucket Mr. Quiet was holding.
Toss that monster bait into the water. Gross.
Muttered Mr. Quiet. As he dumped the bait into the swamp.
Shh, the swamp monster won't come out if there's noise.
Mr. Grumpy whispered.
It won't come out because it doesn't exist.
Yelled Mr. Stubborn.
Maybe you saw a frog. It was not a frog.
Said Mr. Grumpy.
Or a turtle.
Said Mr. Stubborn insisted.
No, it wasn't a turtle either.
Mr. Grumpy rolled his eyes.
Ooh.
Mr. Stubborn shook his flashlight in Mr. Grumpy's face.
I'll bet it was a duck. It was not a duck.
Screamed Mr. Grumpy. As the two fought, Mr. Quiet peered into the water, and the two big black eyes.
Mr. Grumpy? Mr. Stubborn?
Mr. Quiet whispered.
Definitely not a duck.
Oh, look at them eyes. Look at them right there. The swamp monster rose slowly from the water, Mr. Quiet shook in fear.
Guys, monster?
Suddenly, the monster's big, sticky pink tongue shot out and grabbed Mr. Quiet's bucket of bait.
Guys.
Mr. Quiet said again.
Don't interrupt, Mr. Quiet.
Said Mr. Grumpy.
We're having a discussion. More like someone who's completely right talking to someone who's completely wrong.
Yeah, Mr. Stubborn.
Yeah.
Just then, a giant green hand reached down and plucked Mr. Stubborn off the dock. Swamp Monster slowly sank into the water with Mr. Stubborn, and Mr. Grumpy didn't even notice, but Mr. Quiet did.
It's been nice knowing you, Mr. Stubborn.
He said as he continued to sink. Mr. Quiet tapped Mr. Grumpy's shoulder. I can't get into the frame. You come over here where I am. Mr. Quiet tapped Mr. Grumpy's shoulder. Then he pointed out the swamp, pointed out into the swamp, and Mr. Stubborn was sitting on the monster's stomach.
It's the swamp monster.
Mr. Grumpy yelled. Mr. Stubborn looked down at the monster.
This is just a big frog,
he said.
I told you there are no monsters in this swamp.
Oh, no! Let's make music together. Let's make sweet harmony. Let's make music together. Baby, let's make music together. Partner, let's make music together. Charlie, and then make a man free. Oh, yeah.
Wow.